out there, all of you Don't Know Squatch fans. Glad to be back with you. I'm with my co-host Josh. How are you doing, buddy?
All right, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm getting ready for a COVID Thanksgiving, which is going to be very quiet compared to past Thanksgivings. So,
yeah, I'm on the same boat actually. I guess pretty much everybody is. But we're doing this episode again. Also we're back to our COVID procedures, I guess, if you want to call it.
Yes, yeah. Which is fine. I mean, we can still record and we can still do the show. So,
hopefully we got it worked out where we can pump out more of these now that restrictions are probably going to come back. So at least people have something to listen to.
It looks like that's going to happen here in Colorado. So, yeah, we want people to have something to listen to while they're sitting at home. That's our goal.
So I do have a very a Thanksgiving-ish question, if you will. Do you think Bigfoot eats turkey?
Oh, if he eats turkey, he eats it raw. He catches them. He catches them and just eats them raw. Ain't no
slow cooking.
No oven cooked turkeys. No hot oil turkeys. Bigfoot's pretty much a raw. He's a raw guy all around.
So before this started going down, how's the store been going?
Well, this weekend's been really good actually, but during the week it's slowed down dramatically. I've been in the store when I'll have 2 visitors the entire day, and so I'm just doing other stuff, filling online orders and twiddling my thumbs and playing games on my phone just because there's nobody coming in. I think it's because people from Denver are staying home more than they have been, and a lot of our customers are Denver. Well, I shouldn't say that. A lot of them are out of staters too, but the majority, I'd say, are from Denver or bringing people they know who are out of state and who are coming to visit them. They got to bring them to their favorite tourist attraction in Colorado, which is the Sasquatch Outpost.
And I mean, out here in Bailey, we're socially distanced all the time.
Yes, we're always socially distanced. We live 3 acres apart from each other, so if we all stay at home, we are literally socially distanced as much as humans could be.
I'm really excited. I didn't get to be on the call due to the way we're recording some stuff, but tell us about this guest we got coming on.
Yeah, this is a real privilege. So our guest today is a woman named Laura Krantz. Laura is actually she found out later, a relative of Grover Krantz, who was a very famous Bigfoot researcher, one of the very early pioneers of Bigfoot research. And when she saw their last names, she did some research, and I believe they are cousins or second cousins. I think she'll tell us that during the interview, but she wanted to do a podcast series. Her background is with NPR, so she's very familiar with public speaking and broadcasts. So she decided to do a series called Wild Thing, specifically on Bigfoot. And it covers the gamut of, what is Bigfoot, where is Bigfoot, what's the science behind it. And she has 9 episodes, but we'll let her tell us more about that. But Laura has become nationally known because of this podcast, and she is responsible for us getting a tremendous amount of business, because I would guess we've had 60, 75 people come in just because they listened to Wild Thing. In fact, one family were driving on vacation. We're just going to drive through Bailey. they got to the podcast where she talks about Bailey as they're coming down Crow Hill. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're in that town. We have to stop in this store. So perfect irony that the timing worked just perfectly for them to pull in and come to the store. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, that's super cool, man.
So anyway, she did an episode here at the store, and she has agreed to be on with us today as our guest.
Well, I guess let's get to that.
You bet. Let's go.
Your call will be answered in the order it was received.
Particularly excited about our interview today. This is something I've been looking forward to for quite a while. And our guest is Laura Krantz, and I've got Laura on the phone already. How are you, Laura?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Jim?
I'm great. Now, I'll give a brief introduction from my side, but I'm going to have you tell a little bit more, Laura. But Laura is the brainchild and primary actress for the podcast Wild Thing on Bigfoot, which was a huge hit and has been an enormous blessing for our store and museum. I've probably had conservatively 50 to 75 people come into my store because of your podcast, because they heard about the episode you did with us, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But so I am grateful to have you on our show, and I'm very interested to hear more about your story. But tell us a little bit about Wild Thing and how it came about.
So Wild Thing got started, the initial kernel for it really came about probably about, maybe 15 years ago now. I was living and working in Washington, D.C., and there was this big article in the Washington Post about a guy named Grover Krantz, who I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with. And I didn't know who he was. I just knew that he had the same last name that I did, that he had donated his bones and the bones of his dog to the Smithsonian Institution, and they were going to be putting them on display. And then in one tiny paragraph at the very end of the story, they happened to mention that Grover was known for driving around the Pacific Northwest with a spotlight and a rifle looking for Sasquatch. And I thought, who is this guy? He was born in Utah, which is in Salt Lake City, which is where my dad's family was from. So I asked my dad, who asked my grandfather, and sure enough, Grover was my grandfather's cousin, and he used to show up at the family picnic with calipers and measure people's heads. So, he was an anthropologist from the very early days.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So, this story, it was just kind of a fun story to trot out at cocktail parties where you'd say, I have a relative on display in the Smithsonian, or my relative was this giant, so to speak, in the Bigfoot world. And you would kind of talk about it a little bit, and everyone thought it was fascinating. And I knew it was a good story, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it and how to approach it. But I worked for National Public Radio for a very long time and had a lot of experience with telling stories using audio. And then when I found out that Grover's fourth wife, Diane, lived about 30 minutes from me in Colorado, I thought, you know what? Go down there, interview her, see how it goes, see what kind of information you get, and maybe there's a podcast in this. So that's really what got the whole thing started.
And so how many, sorry for that ding, I forgot to turn something off here. How many podcasts were in the original series? I know you're in your second series, which we'll also talk about in a minute, but how many episodes did you have?
Yeah, so in the first season, there were 9 main story episodes, which sort of talked about Grover, talked about some of the things that your listeners may have heard about in terms of like the Bigfoot nest that they found on the Olympic Peninsula out in Washington State. It talks about some of the evidence that's out there. It talks about our fascination culturally with Bigfoot and why we like the idea of Bigfoot, even if we don't necessarily believe. It kind of runs the range. I like to think of it as a Bigfoot 101.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information in there that'll be very, very familiar to people who have already done a lot of research in this. And this really wasn't aimed at them. I hope they listen to it and I hope they like it, but I was really trying to aim it at people who have probably were like me, had heard of Bigfoot and kind of thought about Harry and the Hendersons or about, stuff on the front of the tabloid newspapers, but hadn't really put much more thought to it than that. So it was sort of an introductory course for them. So there were those 9 main story episodes, and then I had some additional bonus episodes where I did longer interviews with Bob Gimlin. I talked to a woman who used to write Bigfoot erotica. I spoke with Peter Byrne. So, just some longer interviews that were kind of fun that I thought people would find interesting. So that was the first season.
And you included our store and museum as one of your episodes. What brought that about? I'm curious. I'm not sure I ever asked you that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So this is episode 7, I believe. Episode 8, which really dives into the sort of commercialized side of Bigfoot. Once I started doing all this reporting on Bigfoot and thinking about Bigfoot, I realized Bigfoot was everywhere. Socks, chocolate bars, surfboards, bicycles, beer, you name it, there's probably a Bigfoot product. And I realized that there were a lot of people cashing in on Bigfoot and had, there was clearly a demand for Bigfoot related products. And I live in Colorado and I live all that far from Bailey, and I had seen signs for the Sasquatch outpost many times in driving up into the mountains. And I thought your place would be a perfect place to go and talk to someone about the appeal of Bigfoot. And sure enough, you talked about how you'd started out as sort of a country store and a Sasquatch outpost, and then you were like, let's get rid of the country store. That's not doing nearly as well as the Bigfoot stuff. So it was kind of interesting to hear that from someone who had experienced it firsthand.
Yeah, and it was a fun interview to do, and if I remember, we did some in the store, and then we went out in the woods, I think. Did I take you out? I can't remember as part of that.
No, we didn't end up going out in the woods. You did give me a full tour of the museum, though.
Okay.
You walked through and told me about all the different exhibits and all that. Yeah, I think you were pretty busy that day, if I remember correctly. There was a steady stream of customers coming through the door. So
too bad. I would have loved to have taken you out in the woods, which we'll still have to do sometime. I've
that'd be
got
fun.
Some
That'd be great.
Spots that I think you would find very interesting.
Can we wait till it's a tiny bit warmer?
Yeah, I went out last night with 2 guys who really wanted to go to an area where I've seen eye shine, and oh God, I just about froze my what's off. I was not prepared for it to be as cold and windy as it was.
Yeah.
I lasted about an hour and a half, and I told them, look guys, I think we're going to have to wrap this one up. Nothing was happening. Couple of weird things happened, but nothing like we were hoping, and so we just called it quits. But I agree with you. We'll go out in the summertime when it's warmer and more conducive to sitting in the dark and listening and watching. So
yeah, that sounds good to me. Even Bigfoot had the sense to be inside on a cold night like that.
Wasn't going to be out. He's thinking, what are you nincompoops doing out in the woods when it's this cold? I'm curious to hear in your 9 episodes some of the. First of all, I have several questions about the episodes. One is, what were some of your? Well, let me back up first. Where would you say you stand on the whole Bigfoot issue? I
am of the opinion that something like Bigfoot could be out there, but I haven't yet seen the kind of evidence that would really convince me. And I think I'm looking for the kind of evidence that Grover was looking for, which is essentially, body, piece of a body, DNA, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I'm totally open to the idea, but I haven't seen something yet that really sells me on it.
So even in your 9 episodes, nothing convinced you conclusively?
Yeah, I saw a lot of interesting stuff. I heard some amazing stories, and they certainly... the eyewitness accounts I heard, especially from people like John Mayenzinski, those stories just kind of make your hair stand up on end. But even those guys said, I don't know for sure what it was. And because they are expressing that doubt, I feel that I should follow their lead.
Well, in your wanderings around the country, what were some new thoughts, perhaps that you'd never considered about Bigfoot, that you learned as you went? A new thought or something that you found interesting or curious, maybe a top couple of things, because I'm sure you had a bunch of takeaways from this journey you went on.
Yeah, I would say one of the most interesting things were those nests, simply because it had not ever occurred to me that, of course, if it's out there, it's going to behave like a primate, and it's going to have similar primate behavior. And so when Jeff Meldrum was talking about how gorillas have these behaviors of creating nests and teaching their young ones to make nests, that just sort of, a light bulb kind of went on. It's like, oh, well, of course they would have similar behavior because evolutionarily they would have been related. So that was one thing that kind of like piqued my interest. Another one was, it was very interesting to hear some of the stories from Native Americans and First Nations, because those stories extend so far back, pre-Columbian history. And clearly this is a creature that has factored into those cultures for a very long time. I think as part of the podcast, I mentioned this idea of the Great Flood, which shows up in the Bible with the story of Noah. But there are those great flood stories all over the world.
Yes,
all these different cultures have those kinds of stories. And what they've found is that as they track this back through geology, there was some point in the sort of post-Ice Age era where the ice dams that were holding back these melting glaciers started to fail, and you got these huge floods in different parts of the world. So there was, where there's smoke, there's a fire kind of thing. There's this spark that was at the center of this story that went on to be a key part of human mythology. So that also was another one of those moments where you start to think, okay, all of these different cultures have a story about some giant hairy creature. That you wonder if there was something that populated the globe in a more widespread way once upon a time, even if it isn't there now and is in the kinds of numbers. So the evolution stuff I found really interesting, the widespreadness of the story throughout history. Those were some of the big takeaways for me.
And you're aware, I'm sure, from your research that this is not a unique American phenomenon, that it's virtually every continent has a version of Sasquatch, be it Yeti or the Yeren in China or the Almas in Russia. So
the Yowie
in Australia, Orang Pendek in Southeast Asia. So in Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, I believe they called them rock apes, and our soldiers knew of them and were warned I've heard from more than one person not to shoot them. So there is a global story of Sasquatch currently. I mean, there's still stories coming out of China and Russia and Australia. So it's a fascinating idea that there could be a creature that, in spite of them being on every continent, barring a few small pieces of physical evidence like skull caps from Tibet and things like that, there's no body that we know of. There's no... there has been DNA study done. The study that was done by Melba Ketchum in 13, I think, or 14, but that's...
Yeah, I heard a lot of controversy around that one, so I was a little wary of it, because I actually watched an argument go down at one of the symposiums I attended over that, so I kind of steered clear of that a little bit, because people seemed pretty heated. People seemed pretty heated about that one.
They do get heated, and my takeaway from that is that the heat comes from questions about her character or things, perhaps bad decisions that she made regarding publications that she published some of her peer support in. However, I don't think you can argue with the DNA itself. I think that's where you would have to go back to those labs and say you misdiagnosed your your information, because they initially all came back saying this is, part human, part unknown. When they found out what they were supposedly analyzing, they changed their story to you contaminated your samples. And so it's still very hotly contested. Personally, I really think that the DNA evidence stands for itself. There's a book, as an aside here to the interview, there's a book written by Scott Carpenter called A Truth Denied that goes through the whole process of that study. He was an integral part of that study, and what happened and why people doubt it, which I have yet to read. I've talked to Scott about it, but it's still a fascinating topic. If there is true evidence, DNA-wise, that really closes the book in some respects. We don't have a body, but we have some DNA of something that is unidentified. So another question I had for you, Laura, was, were you ever, and I don't know how much of your journeys had you out actually in the woods. How many episodes were you? I can't remember. I've listened to them, but it's been a while.
So there was, I went out into the woods several times. There's really only, several of the episodes have little bits of my trips out into the woods. The way I do my podcast is, as people will hear, as I cut up a lot of the different interviews and different experiences and piece them together to sort of tell a narrative story. But I went out into the woods at least 4 times. There's only one episode that is devoted entirely to being out in the woods, and I went and spent some time with Shane Corson and Cindy Cadell. And so that was episode 6, where they sort of talked to me about what it means to go on and go out looking for Sasquatch, what you bring, what you're thinking about, what you're looking and listening for. And they told me about some of their own personal experiences.
Was that the Shit Shane episode?
Yeah. Oh, no, that was the first one.
Oh, that's right.
That was the very first one. Because I went back out with Shane again later. He very kindly, the Olympic Project allowed me to come out there to see the nest.
Okay.
And yeah, that was a moment when you see those the first time. I was kind of, I said it. Shit, Shane.
Yeah. Yeah,
it was fascinating.
It's a famous line from your Wild Thing podcast, I'd have to say. So, in any of those times that you were out, did you ever feel nervous? Did you ever have the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Anything strange happen? We
didn't have anything strange. Well, I take it back. So when we were out looking, in the Mount Hood National Forest. This is when I was with Shane and Cindy. We went on a hike at night, and we had therms, and we had night vision. And there was a moment where we caught sight of something. It was white hot, but we sat and watched it for a good long while, and then it was not moving at all. So we kind of figured it wasn't anything. I mean, we watched it for half an hour, and there was zero movement. So that ended up not being anything, which was kind of disappointing because, it would have been cool to see at least something. I think the stuff that made the hair stand up on my neck was hearing Shane tell his story of being in that same area. He took us back to a spot where he'd had an encounter, and we camped basically in the same area, and he told his experience, and we were all a little creeped out. And then I was sleeping in a tent on the very edge of the group, and I was just like, God, am I going to get eaten?
Yeah.
But nothing that really stood out to me. We didn't, I didn't hear any tree knocks. Didn't hear any weird sounds like vocalizations or anything like that. I was really hoping for that stuff.
Yeah.
But it didn't pan out.
Unfortunately, we haven't figured out how to get those things on command. They tend to have a mind of their own, and
as you would expect.
As you would expect, being an intelligent being, that they, for reasons of their own. I was out when we were driving back last night, and we were talking about Sasquatch crossing in front of people in the headlights, and why do they do that? And I don't believe they're stupid animals like deer that just bolt. I think they cross for a reason when they do. They could wait 20 seconds and cross in the dark as soon as we're past, but they make a choice to cross right in front of us. And my personal opinion is they want it to be seen for whatever reason. They don't typically wait. They just cross. They don't even typically look at the car. They just cross over and are gone. But it's fascinating dealing with a creature that apparently has such a high level of intelligence. And and I do wish that you had had some experiences. I think experiences and encounters are a measure of the time spent in the woods. You do this enough, sooner or later something's going to happen. I mean, whether you've had things thrown at you or hear vocalizations, or I've had them pushing on the tent early in the morning from the outside, and but it's just time spent. Like in many things, you go out once and you hope to have an encounter, and you might. I took a couple out last summer in July who'd never been out before. We were hiking up a very steep incline in the dark. I'd never been to the spot before, which is foolish to begin with, to take somebody to an area I'd never been to and go in the first time in the dark. But we were climbing up. It was fairly steep. We stopped to take a break. I had a piece of hickory wood that I carry with me. I knocked, and I got a knock back. Now, nobody knew we were out there. To my knowledge, there were no campers anywhere near us. So I said to them, well, that's interesting. We hiked farther up the hill, stopped, took a break, knocked, a knock back again, coming from behind us, the direction we had come from. And I said, no, seriously, this never happens. I mean, I never get two knocks back. And then we get to the top of the hill and sit down in the dark, and we start seeing eye shine. And I told them, we're going to have to go out again, because I think you guys are some kind of a good luck charm, because nobody goes out one time and has two knockbacks and sees eye shine. I said, it's just, don't think that this is what everyone's experience is when they go squatching, because that's not the case.
They've been spoiled.
They've been spoiled, because you end up spending hours, days, weeks in the woods when nothing happens, and it's hours and hours of boredom interjected by moments of sheer terror, usually. So it's the
that sounds like the military. That's what all my military friends always say.
Yeah. When you're out on patrol and things, most of the time nothing's happening. But well, tell us a little bit about your second series now, your season 2, and tell us what you're doing. It's kind of unique. I'm curious if you see any tie-in between the two series, but tell us what you're doing, first of all.
Yeah, so the second season is about the search for extraterrestrial life, and this kind of runs the range from the astrobiologists who are working with NASA to sort of look for chemical signatures and biochemical signatures in the atmospheres of planets, to see if there's something there that might be indicative of life. So, for instance, there was this finding with Venus probably about 2 months ago now, where they found traces of a chemical in Venus's atmosphere, which is actually, if you go high up enough in Venus's atmosphere, it's a little bit more habitable than the surface of the planet. And this chemical only shows up on Earth in relationship to life. So now they're wondering, okay, well, I wonder if maybe there's life living in the atmosphere of Venus. So I think one of the next steps is going to be sending probes to look for that kind of thing. So that's one aspect of it. I'm also talking to a number of the scientists who work with SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Right. They're based out of Northern California, and they do a lot of research using radio telescopes and radio astronomy, searching for technology. Right, exactly. They've got a huge one. They use the Arecibo telescope down in Puerto Rico. And they're looking for signs of technology on far-flung planets. So either like radio waves, unnatural radio signals that would be coming from somewhere, or, as we get more advanced technology in terms of our telescopes, being able to see like pollution in an atmosphere of a planet,
interesting.
looking for that kind of thing.
As
Yeah, isn't that cool?
evidence. Yeah, I've never even heard of that idea, but that actually makes sense.
Yeah, and so that's sort of one of the newer things that they're able to do now because our telescope technology has just gotten so much better. And then I also spend some time talking to ufologists, people who've been doing research on, UFO sightings that have stories of those have been part of American mythology, American storytelling, American history for a very long time, at least since 1947, if not before. And 1947 was the Roswell incident. I went down to Roswell and spent some time there at their UFO festival, talking to people who were both there just for the fun of it, and people who are there and take it very seriously and think, something did happen here and the government is covering it up. So similar to Bigfoot, it's kind of covering this whole range of people and what they're looking for and how they're looking and how they're thinking about this.
You must have met some interesting people at that festival.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were some people where you kind of just think, I'm not really sure I know how to...
Yeah.
I'm not there to make fun of people.
No.
I'm not there to laugh at them, but I also sometimes can't engage with them because I just don't know how.
Sure. Well, and they're very serious, as are Bigfoot people. They're very serious about their convictions. I'm sure you found in your research on Bigfoot that the Bigfoot world is kind of divided into two or maybe more schisms, if you want to call it that, between the ape, those who believe Bigfoot is more of an ape, versus those who believe it's a hominid. And there's a great deal of tension within the Bigfoot community over a number of issues, and it's unfortunate. There's a lot of people who won't speak to one another. There's so much information we could be sharing.
Yeah.
Data we could be sharing. I don't know how many databases there are on Bigfoot that all have different information. If we could all combine the information, we might actually be able to do some significant headway certainly on movements of Bigfoot and behavior, but people don't want to share information. It's a funny world, and I would imagine something is probably similar in the UFO world because I know the two intersect. There are points where the Bigfoot world and the UFO world intersect. Did you find that at all?
It was mentioned once or twice. I didn't end up pursuing that all that much, just because it was one of a number of different things that people were talking about. They sort of just tossed it off as something that they had heard. I didn't hear anyone really make a convincing argument for it, or really spend a lot of time on it at all. But it is a theory that I had heard put forth. But I think, you're correct in that there are, people like to kind of think that they're the expert or they have proprietary information about a topic, and I think that extends well beyond Bigfoot and UFOs. I think you see that in all kinds of stuff. So that might just be a human thing.
It's a human thing, and it is true in the Bigfoot world and the UFO world. And I suppose it's normal in a way that would happen. The funny part to me is that various ones of us being researchers would use terms like expert, or how can you be an expert on a creature that's not even categorized by science, that's not even recognized by science as existing? So we love to give titles and pat ourselves on the back that we're the ones doing the best research, and there's a lot of great stuff going on. I'm sure you've made me, from your podcast, want to go up, spend some more time in the Olympic Peninsula. I was up there for a conference a few years back, and each morning I get up at 3 a.m. and just went driving on what they call the Bigfoot Highway. I think it's 101.
Oh,
and just hoping something would run out in front of my truck, but nothing did. I spent a few early mornings, which I paid a price for later on when I was trying to concentrate at the conference. But that's a fascinating part of the country. But it's not, they don't have necessarily more sightings than other parts of the country. There's Colorado has a great number of sightings, and so one of these days I'll get you out and we'll see if we can conjure up an experience of some kind that would add to your library of deciding whether or not Bigfoot exists.
That sounds good. I think that'd be fun.
Are you, for our listeners, where can they go to get your first or second season? What's the best place to find that? Yeah,
the best place to go is probably Apple Podcasts, although you can also find it on Spotify and pretty much anywhere else you get podcasts. Both seasons are, they're in the same feed. So it used to be the icon was a pair of big feet, and now it's an icon of a UFO. But season 1 is about the Bigfoot experiences, and season 2 is about extraterrestrial life. So if you look for Wild Thing podcast, you'll find that pretty much all on all of the podcast platforms that are available.
Great. And for those Wild Thing fans, we're working with Laura to print a couple of her T-shirts and sell them in our store and on our online store. So keep an eye out for that. We're in the process of getting some pricing and things, but I'm excited about carrying some of your merchandise, Laura. I think Wild Thing is a very popular podcast and deserves to be publicized even more.
Well, thank you. And we're excited to be working with you too, just because it's nice to have a place that makes sense to sell the shirts.
Yes.
And it's a place I can direct people to who also email me and say, where can I get a Wild Thing shirt? And now I'll have a place to send them.
Now you have a place. That's great. Well, thank you again for agreeing to be on our show. And I know that we're going to have some listeners who are going to be tuning in to Wild Thing. You were telling me it's possible to buy the whole season, or at least the first season?
Yeah, you can actually buy, there's options. You can buy the entire first season, which is the Bigfoot. You can buy the entire second season, or you can get both of them. To do that, the best way to find that is to go to wildthingpodcast.com.
Okay.
And then there's a couple of links on the website. They're in various places, so you'll be able to find them. But they basically say, get the whole, get both seasons, or get the whole first season or second season. You'll get them without the advertisements, which honestly, I think that's the best way to listen to them. You don't have somebody breaking in and trying to sell you car insurance necessarily. And both times I worked with different composers for both seasons, but they both did an amazing job with the music and creating the tone and setting the scene. So I think it's worth it to not have to listen to the ads and have it get broken up.
And that entitles you to some extra
yes,
information,
you'll get,
correct?
Yes, it doesn't, there's not any extras with the first season because this is sort of a new model that I'm trying out. But there are extra bonus episodes with the second season, and I will be adding more of those over the course of the next few months while I'm still trying to get my feet under me for working on season 3, which has been delayed a little bit by the whole COVID thing. So
any previews on season 3 that you're able to give us?
I'm keeping that one under my hat for the short term, but I'll make sure to let you know once I'm a little further along in development.
Great. Well, I know. I look forward to that. I haven't heard season 2, so I'm going to go get both seasons as soon as we're done here. But thank you again, Laura, for being on You Don't Know Squatch. You've been listening to Laura Krantz, the brainchild behind Wild Thing, Bigfoot and Extraterrestrials. Thanks again, Laura.
Thank you, Jim. This is fun.
Okay.
So, hey, man, that is really cool. Like, she is I would say she's a skeptic, too.
She is. She's on the fence, and I give her a hard time. I'm trying to get her to come out with me, particularly at night. She has not agreed to as of yet, which, if Bigfoot doesn't exist, what's the risk, huh? Why not come out? So she is a skeptic still. She's definitely on the fence.
Well, I'm totally sad I missed out on that. I would love to. ask her some questions too. So
Yep. Yeah, missed having you there, but she did a great interview, and I learned a lot about Laura and learned a lot about her podcast and her second series now on extraterrestrials. So
I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
I know we're on YouTube primarily right now, so we'll be sure to put a link to her YouTube account. I mean, her podcast on the YouTube description.
Yes, let's do that for sure. Because I know people would like to hear it.
Oh yeah. So I heard you got some new toys.
Well, I didn't get toys, but I'm playing with some people who have new toys, or toys that I've never used. So there's some guys who I organized the Bigfoot Adventure Weekend last summer with. Their names are Alan and Jesse, and Anna, Alan's wife, and they have done a tremendous amount of paranormal research, particularly haunted homes, haunted buildings, and so they've acquired a number of toys, I would say, that help in that research. So they came to do an episode of a new series that they're making right now on the paranormal, and they chose our store as one of their subject locations. So they brought some of these toys. Now the toys, one of them is called a spirit box, which is basically a radio receiver that just scans every channel within its reach really quickly, so you basically just get static, just but it's going from one channel to the next and creating a continuous static, and then you hook an audio speaker to it, and the theory behind this is spirits will speak across the spectrum of frequencies. So you'll hear a word come out. So you ask a question. For instance, I asked a question in the store about is Bigfoot happy with what I've built here? And you hear the static, and then you hear this blip, or you hear a blip, and you have to actually put the file on your computer and slow it down to actually pick out any words. But it was funny, every time I asked a question of the spirit box, there was some kind of a response, some kind of a blip or multiple blips. When Alan would ask it questions, there was just silence. And so Alan's like, well, they know who you are because they only answer you. But I did not hear in the end what they were saying, except that they only responded to my voice for some reason. So the spirit box is one, and we've tried this out in the woods as well, and we've asked questions and again get some weird responses on the spirit box. And when Alan and Jesse and I had been out for a little while, actually it was Alan and a cameraman and we've been out in a particular area that's been a hot spot for maybe an hour. So we get the spirit box out, and I said, Alan, let's just try the spirit box one more time. And we turned it on, and I said, is there anything else, any guides who are here, Bigfoot guides or otherwise, that you want to say to me? And right away it comes back, and both Alan and I heard it. It says, leave. So we're like, okay, I get it. So we packed up and left. It was the only word we could discernibly pick out, so we took that as a sign it was time to get out.
That'd be fun to take to like one of those old cemeteries around here, like Buckskin or Como.
Yes, I agree. And they've also got this other toy, and I don't know what you call it, but it basically sits there and listens, and if it hears anything in the, I don't know if it's the electromagnetic spectrum, it starts printing words on the screen. So,
Weird.
So we're sitting in the back in the museum at my store, and we're not talking to it or anything. We're sitting there, and the word comes across: student, desk, haunting, over. And none of us are saying these words. It's picking these words up somehow from somewhere. From the spirit world, I don't know. But the words very often make sense and go together. And so I thought that was fascinating, weird and fascinating. And the last thing they pulled out were these dowsing rods. I don't know, have you ever tried this before?
Is that the things they use to like look for water in wells?
People do use it to look for water, but you can use it just as a tool for when you're dealing with spirits. So basically, you've got two metal, I think they're copper, I don't know, copper rods, let's just say they are, that are bent at a 90-degree angle with the short end that you hold and the long end pointing out. And they've got a plastic sleeve around the part that you hold. So you're actually holding the plastic sleeve, and the rods are just rotating freely in there. You're not moving the rods, and you just hold them loosely. You start by pointing both of them at the ground, apparently, from what I was taught. Then you lift them slowly up so they're horizontal, and then you either verbally or mentally ask it questions. And if the two rods cross in the middle, that's supposedly a yes. If they go out away from each other, that's a no. So I played around with it a little bit in the store, and they crossed, and I don't remember asking what questions I asked, but I swear I was trying my best not to move a hair, just to let these things do what they were going to do. So we go out in the woods, and I say to Alan, hand me these rods, and I hold them up, and I ask the question in my head, are there any Bigfoot guides here? And they crossed in the middle, so that's a yes. So I uncross them, hold them straight. I said, can you see me now? And they crossed in the middle. Open them up again. I said, can I see you? And they crossed in the middle. And so I said, which way should I look? And all of a sudden, both of the rods point to my right. They had never done that before. Both of them point to the right. So I'm thinking, this is weird. So I get out my binoculars and I'm looking and looking. I don't see anything. And so I think, okay, I've got to try some scientific method here. So I pick the rods up again, hold them, say in my head, every answer you've given me has been positive. I need you to say no so that I know I'm not making this up. And the two rods went apart. And so it is weird. It's all I can say. It's weird. I don't know if I believe it's genuinely spirit guides or not. But we started, when Alan came back over to me, we started asking where the Sasquatch were, and the rods kept both pointing in one direction or the other. And we followed it for about 30 minutes, never saw anything. It was an interesting experiment, let's put it that way. And I don't know if Bigfoot could control those or not, but they were moving, I think, on their own. I wasn't, you could have micromuscular movements in your hands that I suppose could influence them. I was really trying hard not to, but I'll have to show it to you sometime when Alan's up here and I'm with you. I think you'd find it fascinating.
Oh yeah, man. That is bizarre. I'm not. I used to work on this show where it was like a haunted house like show. You'd go to places that were haunted or whatnot. And honestly, all the stuff we did on film was made up.
Yeah. Well, did you see anything when you were filming? Did you have any experience?
No,
Nothing.
None so ever.
Okay.
No. We did find this really cool, what we think, because this was right by the Rio Grande border. It looked like an old tunnel that was kind of like
an old mine, maybe?
Like a smuggling tunnel.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
that came into this hotel. It was a really cool hotel, man. It sits in the middle of the highway. It's old hacienda style. I mean, it's got a creepy vibe to it, and I could definitely see how they sell that.
Well, I have to tell you this quick
there's ghosts
story.
there.
Georgetown Loop Railroad has these mines that are supposedly haunted, silver mines, and they've got 100 stories of stuff that happens to people in there. So one night when Chad and I were on our own in Georgetown getting ready for our Old West reenactment the next day, they had a mine tour by lantern light. And so we thought, hey, let's go do this. So we went and joined the group. Everyone was given a little mini flashlight. And periodically, as different points in the mine, the Lebanon mine goes back like 1,000 feet under the mountain. It goes way back there.
No, this sounds cool.
So they would tell everyone, turn off your lights. So we'd all turn off our lights, and they would tell part of the history of the mine. This mine is creepy as hell, I'm telling you. It's got these drifts going off to the left and the right, and you're always walking past and looking down there and wondering if you're going to see something. So anyway, we go back, way back, where it's, you turn off the lights, you can't see your hand in front of your face, you can't see anything. And we go back into one of these drifts, which was called it's where they would haul ore up to the surface. So there was a shaft that went up to the surface at one time. It's a larger room. We go back in there, we're all standing there. The guide says, I'm going to ask the Tommyknockers, which is what they call the spirits in the mine. I'm going to ask the Tommyknockers if they'll let us know that they're here. And I have a digital recorder here, and I'm going to record for 1 minute. So I'm going to ask everyone to turn off your lights and to be silent. So we all turn off our lights, and he says, gentlemen, he calls the Tommyknockers gentlemen, we would be very much appreciative if you would let us know of your presence with us here, and I'm going to start recording now. And he hits click, and there's a brief silence, and then I hear this whispering, and I'm thinking, damn, and they told everyone to be quiet. Why is somebody in the group whispering? They're ruining everything. And he records for a minute, and he turns it off. And he says, did anybody hear anything? And Chad and I both said, yeah, we heard a voice whispering. Who was that? And nobody said anything. And Chad said, when he heard the whispering, he had his back to another section of the drift that went back that was pitch black. And there was one couple standing behind him. So he hears this whispering behind him. He turns around to look at the couple, and they're looking behind them, back in the black. And so he rewinds and he plays the recording, and I'll be darned if you could not hear these voices whispering on this recording. And I thought, that is the creepiest thing I've ever heard. These guys, these old dead miners in there whispering to each other, and you could absolutely hear it. It was crazy.
So, are you going to become a Ghostbuster now?
No, because I don't like the dark. I honestly do not like the dark.
I
don't mind being in the woods in the dark. I don't like being in creepy old buildings and mines in the dark. That's totally different.
The only time I ever liked being in the dark is when the government gave you a rifle.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I hate the dark. I don't even go out in my backyard once it gets dark out here. It's too dark.
I've gotten used to being in the woods in the dark and what that feels like and everything. I still have my moments, don't get me wrong, but being in a creepy old house in the dark by myself, I've told people who are ghost hunters, you can offer me a whole lot of money. I'm not going in there with you. I'm not going to do that. There's no way.
Well, that sounds really cool. Do you know what their show name is or anything?
They're doing a new podcast, right? The one that they came to record in the store. I don't know if they've got a working name yet. Alan's working on a new podcast called Trails to the Unknown or something, and he's going to be doing a lot of paranormal stuff. I will find that out, and the next time we're on together, I will give them a plug, because Alan and Jesse and Ron, who's Alan's father-in-law, have all been into this a long time, a lot longer than me, and they've got some stories to tell. But this new series is specifically on the paranormal, on vortexes, on that kind of stuff. So we'll see.
Maybe one day we'll do a special episode and invite them on and talk about that kind of stuff.
There you go. Yeah. And then
how do you feel? I was going to ask you earlier before we sign off, but how do you feel being considered in the paranormal realm?
It's a great question. The Bigfoot world is divided into at least two groups of those who believe in the woo, which is what we call it, the woo or the paranormal side of Bigfoot, and those who believe that Bigfoot is purely a physical flesh and blood creature, and the two do not agree. And so I'm getting used to being considered in the paranormal camp, simply because I've had too many experiences with Bigfoot out in the woods that I cannot explain, that go beyond the physical realm. And so, as have many friends of mine. So to those who are listening and say, come on, Myers, you're pushing it here, maybe, but go spend as much time in the woods as I've spent, and have some of the stuff happen to you, and you'll begin to think, okay, I cannot explain that, and that's not physical, that's not flesh and blood, there's something else going on here.
Well, hey, man, that's a good place to leave it, I guess.
Sure.
But, man, yeah, that's... I always, especially listening to our guest today, I was wondering about that, dude. Do you take offense to that or not?
No, I don't. Used to. Now people just, if they don't like it, they can lump it. I don't really care.
Well, I guess, everybody, please keep listening. Tell your friends about us. Right now, like I said, we were having problems with our hosting site, so we're moving over. So catch us on YouTube. I believe our social media person is going to start uploading, or sharing at least, these playlists to Facebook. So
Great.
Be sure to like us over there too. And while you're at it, you're already on Facebook or whatever, stop by Sasquatch Outpost. And
there you go.
Be sure to like that page as well.
Check it out.
Man, I learned that I didn't know anything about the supernatural, but you know what else I don't know about?
What?
I don't know
Squatch.
All right, buddy, we'll talk to you.
All right, bye-bye.